Hey guys, welcome to Neighbor Stories with JusRead. Today we're diving into some incredible stories about overcoming the toughest neighbor disputes. Our story is titled, We Repaired 100 Broken Sidewalks in 48 Hours. The story starts like this. Living in Sunnyside Estates had been a dream come true when my wife Sarah and I first moved in 5 years ago. The neighborhood was picturesque, with well-maintained lawns, beautiful homes, and friendly neighbors. But over the past couple of years, things had started to change, and not for the better. It all began when our longtime Homeowners Association president, Mr. Johnson, retired and moved to Florida. The new board that took over seemed more interested in lining their own pockets than actually maintaining our community. Slowly but surely, the cracks began to show, quite literally. Our once pristine sidewalks started deteriorating. At first, it was just a few minor cracks here and there. But as months passed, those cracks turned into serious tripping hazards. People were stumbling, kids were scraping their knees, and elderly residents were afraid to take their daily walks. I'm Tom, by the way, a 35-year-old software engineer who's lived here with Sarah for the past 5 years. We don't have kids yet, but we're hoping to start a family soon. That's part of why this whole sidewalk situation bothered me so much. How could we raise kids in a neighborhood where it wasn't even safe to walk down the street? I decided to bring up the issue at the next Homeowners Association meeting. Big mistake. Thank you for your concern, Tom, said Karen, our new Homeowners Association president, in a tone that suggested she couldn't care less about my concern. But we simply don't have the budget for such extensive repairs right now. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my cool. Isn't maintaining common areas like sidewalks one of the main purposes of our Homeowners Association fees? Karen's plastic smile didn't waver. Well, yes, but we've had some unexpected expenses this year. I later found out those unexpected expenses included a lavish end-of-year party for the board members and their families at a 5-star resort. But at the time, I just nodded and sat back down, feeling defeated. That night, as Sarah and I were walking our dog Max, we saw our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, take a nasty fall on one of the broken sidewalks. Mrs. Peterson, Sarah cried out, rushing to help her up. Are you okay? The old lady was shaken but thankfully not seriously hurt. Oh, I'm fine, dear, she said, trying to brush it off. These old bones are tougher than they look. But I could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't the first time she'd fallen, and she was scared it wouldn't be the last. That was the last straw for me. If the Homeowners Association wouldn't fix the problem, then we'd have to do it ourselves. The next day, I started making calls. First to my buddy Mike, who worked in construction. Then to other neighbors who I knew were just as fed up with the situation as I was. You want to repair all the sidewalks? Mike asked, sounding incredulous. Do you have any idea how much work that would be? I know it's a lot, I admitted, but we can't just sit back and watch our neighborhood fall apart. Plus, think of the message it'll send to the Homeowners Association. Mike was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. All right, count me in, but we're gonna need a lot more help. And that's how Operation Sidewalk Saviors began. We started spreading the word, careful to keep it under wraps from the Homeowners Association board. We didn't want them trying to shut us down before we even got started. To our surprise and delight, people were eager to help. It turned out a lot of residents had been silently fuming about the state of our sidewalks. Within a week, we had a team of over 50 volunteers ready to work. But we still faced two major hurdles: materials and time. We needed concrete, tools, and other supplies, and we needed to figure out how to do all this without the Homeowners Association catching wind of it. That's when Sarah had a brilliant idea. What if we made it a community event? She suggested, like one of those extreme makeover shows, but for our sidewalks? I loved it. Not only would it be a great way to rally the community, but it would also make it harder for the Homeowners Association to shut us down if we were already in the middle of the project. We set a date for 2 weeks from then, a long weekend when we knew most of the Homeowners Association board members would be out of town for a conference. Our goal? To repair 100 broken sidewalk sections in just 48 hours. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Mike and I mapped out all the damaged areas and created a detailed plan of attack. Sarah coordinated with local businesses for donations and discounts on materials. Other neighbors volunteered their driveways as staging areas for supplies. As the big weekend approached, excitement in the neighborhood was at an all-time high. It felt like we were planning a surprise party for the entire community. Finally, the day arrived. At 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, our volunteer army assembled. We had people of all ages and backgrounds, retirees, teenagers, young families, even a few kids eager to help however they could. All right, everyone, I called out, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Let's do this. And with that, we got to work. The sound of jackhammers filled the air as we began breaking up the old, damaged concrete. It was hard, dusty work, but spirits were high. Hey Tom, called out Bob, one of our retired neighbors, over the noise. I haven't had this much fun since my army days. I grinned, wiping sweat from my brow. Glad you're enjoying yourself, Bob. Just don't work too hard. We need you in one piece for the block party next month. As the morning wore on, we settled into a rhythm. Teams were assigned to different sections of the neighborhood, with more experienced volunteers guiding the newbies. Sarah and a few others set up a refreshment station, keeping everyone hydrated and fed. By noon, we had already removed most of the damaged sections and were starting to pour new concrete. The transformation was incredible to see. "I can't believe how much we've done already," Sarah said, handing me a bottle of water. "Do you think we'll really finish all 100 sections?" I nodded, feeling confident. At this rate, we might even finish early. But of course, things couldn't go that smoothly. Around 2 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up, and out stepped Karen, our homeowners association president. Apparently, word had gotten back to her about our little project. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, marching up to me with fire in her eyes. "You can't just start tearing up sidewalks without homeowners association approval." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, we've been asking for these repairs for months. You said the Owners Association couldn't afford it, so we decided to take matters into our own hands." "This is completely unacceptable," she sputtered. "I'm shutting this down right now. Everyone, stop what you're doing immediately." But to Karen's surprise, and my relief, nobody moved. In fact, more neighbors started gathering around, tools in hand, expressions defiant. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "Karen dear, I've fallen twice on these broken sidewalks. My grandchildren are afraid to visit because it's not safe for them to play outside. If Tom and the others are willing to fix this problem for free, why on earth would you stop them?" Karen looked around, realizing she was outnumbered. Her face flushed red with anger, but she must have known she was fighting a losing battle. "Fine," she snapped, "but if anything goes wrong, it's on your heads. The Homeowners Association won't be held responsible for any injuries or damages." With that, she stormed back to her car and drove off, leaving us to continue our work in peace. The rest of the day flew by. As the sun began to set, we set up floodlights to keep working through the night. People took shifts, grabbing naps when they could. The atmosphere was electric. It felt like we were part of something bigger than ourselves. By Sunday morning, we had completed 75 of the 100 sections we'd planned to repair. We were tired, sore, and covered in concrete dust, but morale was higher than ever. "Come on folks," Mike shouted, rallying the troops. "We're in the home stretch now. Let's show this neighborhood what community spirit really means." As we worked through Sunday, more and more people joined in. Even some who had been skeptical at first came out to lend a hand. Kids set up a lemonade stand to keep the workers refreshed, and someone started a barbecue to feed the hungry volunteers. At 4 p.m. on Sunday, just 2 hours before our self-imposed deadline, we finished the last section. A cheer went up from the crowd as Mike smoothed out the final bit of concrete. "We did it," Sarah cried, throwing her arms around me. "I can't believe we actually did it." As we stood back and looked at our handiwork, I felt a swell of pride. The difference was incredible. Where there had once been cracked, dangerous sidewalks, there were now smooth, even pathways. But even more beautiful was the sense of community that had blossomed over the weekend. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now chatting like old friends. Kids were already riding their bikes and skateboards on the newly smooth surfaces. It was like we'd breathed new life into the entire neighborhood. The next few days were a blur of congratulations and thank yous. Local news even picked up the story, praising our community's initiative. But the real test came at the next Homeowners Association meeting. Karen tried to start the meeting as if nothing had happened, but the room was buzzing with energy. Finally, Bob stood up. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," he said. "This weekend, our community came together to do something amazing, something that frankly should have been done by the Homeowners Association months ago." Karen's smile became strained. "Yes, well, while we appreciate the initiative, we must stress that this kind of unauthorized work cannot happen again. The liability issues alone—" "Oh, come off it, Karen," interrupted Mrs. Peterson, surprising everyone with her forceful tone. "Those sidewalks were a liability. Now they're safe. Instead of criticizing, maybe you should be thanking Tom and everyone else who worked so hard this weekend." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. I could see Karen realizing she was losing control of the narrative. "Perhaps," she said stiffly, "we should put it to a vote. All those in favor of retroactively approving the sidewalk repairs, raise your hand." Every hand in the room shot up, except for Karen's and her two closest allies on the board. "Motion carried," she said through gritted teeth. But we weren't done yet. Mike stood up next. "I have another motion," he said. "I move that we conduct a full audit of the Homeowners Association's finances for the past year, and that we hold a new election for the board at the next meeting." This time, Karen couldn't hide her dismay. That's not necessary," she stammered. "We've been completely transparent." "Then you should have no problem with an audit," I chimed in. "After all, we just want to make sure our Homeowners Association fees are being used appropriately. For things like, maintaining our community's infrastructure." The vote for this motion was just as unanimous. Karen and her cronies looked like they'd swallowed lemons. In the weeks that followed, our little sidewalk project had far-reaching effects. The audit revealed, as we'd suspected, that a significant portion of our Homeowners Association fees had been misused. Karen and most of the board were forced to resign. At the next election, we voted in a new board made up of people who had been instrumental in the sidewalk project. Mike became our new president, with Sarah as treasurer. Their first act was to implement a new system of transparency, where all major decisions and expenditures would be put to a community vote. But the changes weren't just administrative. Something fundamental had shifted in our neighborhood. People were outside more, talking to their neighbors, organizing community events. It was like we'd remembered what it meant to be a real community. One evening, about a month after the project, Sarah and I were taking a walk with Max. We passed Mrs. Peterson, who was out for her own evening stroll. "Evening, Tom, Sarah," she called out cheerfully. "Isn't it a beautiful night for a walk?" As we chatted with her, I couldn't help but think about how different things were now. A month ago, Mrs. Peterson had been afraid to leave her house. Now, she was out enjoying the evening without a care in the world. "You know," Mrs. Peterson said, her eyes twinkling, "I've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years, and I've never been prouder to call it home than I am right now." As we said goodnight and continued our walk, I squeezed Sarah's hand. "We did good, didn't we?" I said. She smiled up at me. "We really did. And just think, this is the neighborhood our kids will grow up in someday." I looked around at the smooth sidewalks, the neighbors chatting on their front porches, the kids playing safely in their yards. "Yeah," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "I can't think of a better place." As we rounded the corner towards our house, I reflected on everything that had happened. What had started as a simple desire to fix some broken sidewalks had turned into so much more. We'd not only repaired our infrastructure, but we'd also rebuilt our sense of community. It just goes to show, I thought, that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. All it takes is for someone to stand up and say, "Enough is enough. Let's fix this ourselves." And who knows, maybe our little sidewalk revolution will inspire other communities to take charge of their own neighborhoods. After all, if we could repair 100 broken sidewalks in 48 hours, imagine what other seemingly impossible things people could accomplish when they work together. As Sarah and I reached our front porch, I took one last look around our transformed neighborhood. The smooth, safe sidewalks were more than just concrete paths. They were a symbol of what we could achieve when we came together as a community. I smiled to myself. Who would have thought that fixing a few cracks in the sidewalk could lead to repairing the cracks in our community? But that's exactly what had happened. And as I opened our front door, I knew that whatever challenges our neighborhood might face in the future, we'd face them together, one step at a time on our newly repaired sidewalks. Update. It's been 6 months since our sidewalk renovation project, and the changes in Sunnyside Estates have been nothing short of incredible. Not only are our sidewalks safe and smooth now, but the entire atmosphere in the neighborhood has transformed. Remember how I mentioned the audit of the Homeowners Association's finances after the project? Well, that opened up a whole can of worms. Turns out, Karen and her buddies on the board had been misusing our Homeowners Association fees for years, and not just on fancy parties. When the full extent of their corruption came to light, the whole community was outraged. Improper spending, kickbacks from contractors, even straight-up embezzlement. They'd been lining their own pockets at the expense of the neighborhood. Many of us wanted to see them prosecuted, myself included. But Sheila, our new Homeowners Association president, and a retired lawyer, had an even better idea. Taking this to court would be long, expensive, and ultimately the money would just go to the state, she explained at an emergency community meeting. "I say we handle this internally, make them pay back every penny they stole plus damages." It sounded too good to be true, but Sheila was confident. She enlisted the help of some of her old law colleagues, and together they crafted a rock-solid case against Karen and the others. When presented with the evidence and the threat of a very public lawsuit, the former board members caved immediately. They agreed to pay back all the misused funds, plus an additional 50% in damages. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, here's the really brilliant part. Instead of just splitting that money among the homeowners, which would have been a nice quick buck, we voted to invest it back into the community. We repaired and updated the community pool that had fallen into disrepair. We replaced the old rusty playground equipment with brand new state-of-the-art play structures. We even had enough to redo the landscaping throughout the entire neighborhood. And the best part? We put it all to a community vote. Every major decision was discussed and voted on by the homeowners. It was true democracy in action. Karen and her cronies, meanwhile, couldn't show their faces around here anymore. They put their houses on the market and moved away in shame. Good riddance, I say. As for me, I found myself stepping up more and more in the community. Inspired by the success of the sidewalk project, I started organizing regular neighborhood events, barbecues, movie nights, even a big block party on the 4th of July. People I'd barely spoken to before became good friends. We started a neighborhood watch program, not because of crime, but just to look out for each other. When old Mrs. Johnson had hip surgery, we made sure she had meals delivered every day until she recovered. It's funny, when I first set out to fix those sidewalks, I thought I was just trying to solve a simple infrastructure problem. But in the end, it wasn't really about the sidewalks at all. It was about rebuilding our sense of community, of looking out for one another. And you know what? It worked. Sunnyside Estates isn't just a collection of houses anymore. It's a true neighborhood, in every sense of the word. Just the other day, as Sarah and I were walking Max, we ran into Jim, one of our new neighbors. He and his family had moved in just after the whole Homeowners Association debacle. You know, he said, when we were looking for a place to live, our realtor warned us about this neighborhood. Said the Homeowners Association was a nightmare and the place was going downhill. I raised my eyebrows. Really? And what made you decide to move here anyway? Jim laughed. We drove by and saw all the changes happening. The new playground, the pool renovation. But more than that, we saw people outside talking to each other, kids playing together. It looked like a real community. I couldn't help but grin. That's because it is, Jim. That's because it is. As we said our goodbyes and continued our walk, I couldn't shake the feeling of pride. We had done this? We had taken a neighborhood on the brink of collapse and turned it into something special. It hadn't been easy, of course. There had been obstacles and setbacks along the way. But we'd persevered. We'd banded together and proven that a group of determined individuals really can make a difference. And that, I realized, was the true legacy of our sidewalk project. Not the smooth concrete or the repaired cracks, but the spirit of community it had fostered. The way it had brought us together and shown us what we were capable of when we worked as one. As Sarah and I turned the corner back onto our street, I took in the sight of our beautiful neighborhood. The well-maintained homes, the lush green lawns, the children playing safely on the sidewalks. This was more than just a place to live. This was a community in every sense of the word. And I was proud to call it home. I squeezed Sarah's hand and smiled. You know, I said, I think we're going to be very happy here for a long, long time. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I think so too, Tom. I think so too. And with that, we walked up the path to our house, ready to face whatever the future might bring, together, as a family, and as part of a community we had helped to build. And guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this epic neighbor showdown, please smash that like button, comment with some house emojis to show your support, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot, and I will see you again tomorrow with another amazing story.